Much for coming to this rather impromptu talk. My name is Aaron Wendland. I am the Vice President for International Affairs at KSE and Professor of Public Philosophy. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mikhail Matlik. He is a policy advisor at the European Parliament, coordinator of the Ukraine in the EU hub, bringing together academics, policymakers, and experts working on EU enlargement. He is also managing editor of the Review of Democracy, a journal affiliated with Central European University's Democracy Institute. He was a visiting scholar at Princeton University, the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin, and the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. He also obtained his PhD at the European University Institute in Florence. The title of Mikhail's talk is How Should the EU Change to be Ready for EU Membership? It's an honor to have you here. Thanks so much for coming to Kyiv, and let's give him a warm round of applause to welcome him.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aaron. I'm very happy that you are here. I know that it's your second week at the KSE, so I'm very glad that we can meet. And thank you all for coming. We arranged this talk really like 2 days ago, so I'm happy that you managed to come here on such a short notice. I would try to do it rather interactively if possible, so I will present a few points if that's okay with you, and then please feel free to ask questions. I would want to make it as interactive as possible, and maybe at the end I will present this project about Ukraine in the EU, because you might be interested, you might want to join at some point. We are working on some training possibilities, and we hope that the KSE will be our main partner in Ukraine. So it will be natural for us to cooperate. The title of the talk is what should the EU do? How should it prepare for enlargement? Because what I think is crucial is not only the preparation and readiness of Ukraine, but also of the EU, and it's much less debated. That's why I thought that we should also talk about that point. I very much hope that Ukraine will be ready and will be able to join in the next few years. But it means also that in this next few years the EU should prepare for enlargement, and that's why I think that work should be done not only here in Kiev and in all the possible cities and places in Ukraine, but also in Brussels and in the European capitals. But before I will try to outline the most important changes that would be necessary. I will start maybe from a kind of a brief presentation of what I would see as the nature of the EU at the moment, or nature of the EU before the war, actually, because I think that the war has changed a lot. Also, not only here, because it's obvious, we can feel it, unfortunately, but it's changed a lot, and here actually to a certain degree in a positive sense in the EU. So that's also important to see these changes, and then after I present these changes, the things that I think were changed on the EU level, I would like to talk about these changes that I think are still necessary and will be necessary for Ukraine, for Ukraine to join the EU. But let me come back to the European project as such. Let me present some traits that I think are crucial and that will have to be also kind of rethought in the coming years. First point that I wanted to make is that the EU had this major instinct of depoliticizing political conflicts, trying to remove the conflictual part, the political part, as much as possible, and to move these conflicts to courts, which means that many real political conflicts were somehow hidden because of that. There is a strong judicialization of the EU. Many real conflicts are moved to the level of the European Court of Justice, for example, and they are not really being discussed on the political level. A huge part of the political integration in Europe happened not because of the decisions of European nations, but because of decisions of the European Court of Justice, and as a result of decisions of the national courts that referred the cases often to the European Court of Justice using a special mechanism that is part of the treaties. The whole advancement from this beginning of European integration in the 50s to more or less late 80s happened mostly through courts, and it obviously, from the perspective of those who think that kind of a more integrated Europe is good, it was a positive process, but it had its huge disadvantage, and this disadvantage is democracy. It was a project that lacked democratic legitimacy. Because, of course, there were some referenda, especially especially later in the 90s. For example, 1992 referendum in France on the Maastricht Treaty, a very important treaty. Only that were those who were in favor won just by a small margin. We then witnessed other referenda. Also in France, where the treaty establishing European Constitution was rejected, actually. So when the real democracy was involved, the European project was in trouble. So what I wanted to argue is that the EU has a problem with democracy, and now it's the time to work on it. It would be the case also without the war in Ukraine and without the enlargement, but with the enlargement, I think it's even more pressing, and it's crucial also for Ukraine, I think, because democracy is one of the stakes of this war. So I think that this is also why the EU will have to rethink its democratic legitimacy before the next round of enlargement. Then a second point that I wanted to make is about sovereignty. The whole project was based on the idea that the nation states move some of their competences to the European level in order to be more, somehow, to have more leverage. It started in the 50s from this European coal and steel community when essentially Germany and France agreed to control their coal and steel industries together by creating international institutions. But then, of course, it moved forward. There was a customs union, there was a single market created, and a single currency, and all the steps that created a very strongly integrated political organization, the only one in the world actually that is so strongly integrated. But it also means that sovereignty is a problem, so is a big challenge for the European project, because with what I said before, without clear democratic legitimacy, this transfer of sovereignty is a big challenge for the political community. And again, I think it's important to rethink that aspect of European integration, also because of what's happening here, because one of the reasons for this war is the fight for Ukrainian sovereignty. So the meaning of the nation state here is crucial. It's also important in other countries, and I think that this will have to be not solved through, for example, decisions of courts or somehow in the shadow of cabinets, but it will have to be discussed again, kind of in a very transparent way to make sure what aspects of sovereignty should really be moved to the European level and what should stay with member states. And it's a huge challenge for many member states, and as we see here in Ukraine, this problem of sovereignty is one of the crucial political problems that has to be rethought, and it's also clear that there is a very clear political will now to accept Ukraine as a member state, but Ukraine, fighting for its sovereignty, will not agree to move kind of the 90% of its sovereignty to the European level. That's why I think that this requires a big discussion. And also, this problem was not only linked to what's happening here. You could see that in the debate surrounding Brexit, sovereignty was one of the key issues. Take back control this was the slogan of the Brexiteers. If they manage to do that, that's another question. I think that it's still better, of course, to be part of the international system, the European system, and a nation can have, in my opinion, more leverage being in the EU and resigning from some part of its sovereignty, but I think it should be done in a very transparent way, because otherwise we risk a backlash that we watched in the UK, but we are now watching also in Hungary very strongly. It's a problematic country also for many reasons, also for geopolitical reasons, for Ukraine as well, but not only, but also in my country, in Poland. And that this is a problem. The sovereignty is a big issue for societies, and it should be treated seriously by the bureaucrats in Brussels. And third aspect that I wanted to talk about when it comes to the kind of the pre-war EU, it's the geopoliticization. The EU was born after the Second World War, of course, as a geopolitical project. The project that aimed at providing peace to the continent, but because of the strong presence of the US on the continent of the American army, the majority of European states became less and less interested in the geopolitical aspects of their existence, so to say, because they thought that okay, everything could be solved by their membership in NATO and by the American presence in Europe. And we can see now we are paying the cost now, one can say, because the European armies are pretty weak. Maybe if we don't count the French one, but even with the French one, it's not a very strong army that could provide as much help as the Americans do here. And I think it's also the question of mentality. The geopolitical aspects were not part of the European mentality. If you look at the speeches of, for example, one of the former presidents of the European Council, Herman Van Rompuy, you would see that he would claim that the EU is mostly, an economic project, not a geopolitical one. And today we see how wrong he was, how it was a bad idea to concentrate solely on the economic aspects, on the single market, which of course was very important, but it didn't answer to fundamental questions and needs that we see right now, especially here in Ukraine. There were some small elements of this geopolitical thinking in the EU. One of them was Eastern Partnership, but it was like it wasn't enough, definitely. But there was this idea that the Eastern European countries should be given some kind of a framework to cooperate with the EU. But we can see that it wasn't enough. That the needs were much bigger than the political projects proposed to the countries in Eastern Europe, and the same goes for Africa, actually, by the way. And now, if I can turn to the war, to the meaning of the war for the European project. So the first point that is very clear here is the return of a nation, I'd say. Nations were somehow treated as something that we should be almost a bit ashamed of, because it was Europe that was seen as a kind of the utopia or the important project. And Ukraine proves that you can have both very strong national feelings and fight for your nation, but it can go together with the pro-European feelings that, if you look, of course, you know it much better than me, but if you look at the Maidan of 2014, you can see that, the nation was fighting for its presence in Europe. And this is something, I think, very important for the European project. It has fundamental consequences because I think it brings kind of this need to rethink this relationship between nation and Europe. That it's not exclusive. We don't need to choose only the European project and forget about national feelings. This brings, in my opinion, kind of the negative results for both the European project and the nations. Even if it's complicated, combining identities is not easy, but it's possible. And I think that Ukraine is one of the kind of best examples of this coexistence of these two identities. Then a very strong element that is not part of the European DNA, I'd say, but could be, thanks to Ukraine, is this huge project of the imperialization. And it's not only the question of the like, military confrontation with Russia, but also the imperializations in a cultural sense that is happening here, trying to see the consequences of being part of being colonized. The majority of European states have a very different experience, as you know, because they were colonial powers, and we pay, and also unfortunately Ukraine pays the price for that, because many of the countries that were formerly colonies in Africa, or countries that seemed that saw themselves as colonized, for example, in South America, they are reluctant to support Ukraine, thinking that that what's happening here is a part of a huge American enterprise, and they don't see that it's actually a very different process happening here. That you are fighting a colonial power, that you are like showing the way how to de-imperialize the kind of the world, not the other way around. And actually, they should support this fight. But I guess that EU with Ukraine can be much more credible when it comes to the contacts with the global south, with all these countries who don't want to cooperate with the US because of this fear of colonization. The European project can be exactly aiming at kind of the decolonization, de-imperialization, because of what's happening here. And then the third point is indeed the question of geopolitics and the security. This dimension was very weak in the EU. Already in the 50s, the first attempts to create a sort of European army were rejected by the Gaullist France. Nothing really moved in this respect. Not much is moving still, actually, unfortunately. Well, there are some changes because of the war also. There is a coordination of arms delivery. There will be more money for that in the coming years. So we can see positive changes. But still, the mindset is that it's not us who should do that. It's the US, it's NATO, and not the EU. And I guess that also the meaning of the war in Ukraine for the European project is changing this attitude, and is making the EU can make the EU a geopolitical player. And that's why also this accession is so important, not only from the perspective of Ukraine, but also from the perspective of the EU. And now, if I can move to the third point of my presentation, meaning how the EU should change in order to be ready. This is, of course, a very complex, again, discussion, because the EU had, as I tried to show, also huge problems already before the war in Ukraine. Brexit, migration crisis, COVID, all this lost referenda, so the kind of the lack of democratic legitimacy. It was like crisis after crisis, euro crisis before also the economic crisis. There were attempts to rethink the project. For example, a conference on the future of Europe was organized, a kind of a big endeavor with the randomly chosen European citizens who would discuss kind of the future of Europe. But all these debates were somehow, nobody was interested in them. They were theoretically very important because they touched upon fundamental issues. But for example, nobody really in Brussels even knows what are the conclusions of the Conference on the Future of Europe, which means that the political process didn't manage to somehow to involve citizens to really somehow get to minds and hearts of European citizens, or even to the hearts and minds of bureaucrats, not to mention the citizens. But here this change when it comes to the European project can happen because of the war, and it has to happen before the enlargement, because otherwise the EU will not be functional. And I wanted to mention a few points that I think should be part of this thinking process. One is our lessons from previous enlargement. the enlargement as a tool, as a geopolitical tool, was actually a very successful one. If you look at the European community started from 6 countries, and then it moved to 28. So in the majority is a huge success story. Therefore, it's an important instrument that should be used properly also with regard to Ukraine. But there are, of course, many problems, especially if we look at the last enlargements. So we can say, for example, if we look at the 2004 enlargement, that it will be almost 20, it will be 20 years next year. There was a huge success. It was a huge success when we look at the economic side. So if you look at the integration of these countries, so these were 10 countries, getting to the single market, it really worked very well. It brought economic fruits that one can see in all these countries. There is this question of this middle income trap, that we managed to be the kind of this sort of places where the kind of the big German companies either produce their cars and other stuff, or we produce some elements for the cars, for example. So this is working. This brought us a lot of growth, but still there is this danger that if we don't move forward, for example, with research and innovation, we will always be somehow below the most important member states in the EU. But I think this is another problem. Although I think it should also be considered here in Ukraine. So what to do already now when preparing for enlargement in order not to be in this trap. I think there are also important lessons to be drawn from our cases. But then there is a huge challenge of the political integration, meaning mostly the rule of law crisis. We can see that the EU was not really successful when it comes to pushing the countries that have problems with democracy, with the rule of law, to come back or to respect the rule of law. Here it's another thing. I think another element that should be a matter of huge discussion in Brussels, because there's a question of European competences also here, which are limited. It will need to be discussed, but definitely when we look at the rule of law, it's one of the biggest problems when it comes to the member states that joined relatively recently. There is also another problem if we look at the enlargement strategy, because, of course, when we think of enlargement, we think of Poland, Hungary, Baltic states, and so on. But there is a big group of countries that were promised accession and didn't, and it never happened, meaning Western Balkans. Of course, it's a very different case than Ukraine, and I don't think anyone now in Brussels thinks that that you could go through the same situation like the Western Balkans. But there is this danger of promising something that we don't keep, and this is fundamental for Brussels. So if we promise something, we should keep this promise, because if we don't keep it, then it will just strengthen the backsliding trend that we see now in the Balkans, and that unfortunately also is meaningful in the context of war, like in countries like Serbia, but also Bosnia and Herzegovina. So that's a fundamental problem, that the EU is not credible in the Western Balkans there. So it will have to think strongly how to be credible, how to keep credibility here in Ukraine, because I think this credibility is not lost. It can be kept, but it means that we have to somehow really keep the promises we make. Then there is a question of the new enlargement, so to say, methodology, because there are different ways how to organize it. In the beginning, there were just there was no. I mean, especially with respect to Greece and Spain, there was no methodology. The countries that just joined, and then they tried to. The EU tried to integrate them, but it was possible because the problems they were facing were smaller, and the European Commission managed somehow to organize, for example, cohesion funds quickly. For them, it somehow worked. But now it might be more difficult. So the enlargement policy has to be designed well from the beginning, and we can see a big difference now when thinking about enlargement. There is this idea to give to the candidate countries much more than the other countries got. So to give elements of membership already before the membership. There is a danger in this thinking because, of course, some in Brussels will see it as a way to avoid the accession, to give some aspects, based on the different on different agreements, and then to stop just before letting the Ukraine join. But I think that here we should come back to this credibility question. So if we promise Ukraine to join, we cannot do that, and this kind of giving more earlier is a good way to motivate Ukraine, because it will be important, of course, to motivate Ukraine to reform, and also to prepare it for this membership. Here we have your economists, so you probably know these questions better than I. The biggest challenge in the economic sense would be to not to force Ukraine to open the market too quickly, because it would mean that many industries here will face difficulties. It was already a problem in the association agreement, and it will be also a problem in the course of giving you membership. So here I think that this will be the kind of the biggest challenge: how to prepare Ukrainian economy before joining the European single market. And there are ways, of course. There are pre-accession funds that are already being designed, and it was already the case before the 2004 and 2007 enlargement, and there are, of course, cohesion funds. Cohesion funds are designed exactly because of that. The logic is that you open up your market that is weaker than not in all respects, but in some respects is weaker than the Western European markets. But in order to keep up, or in order to develop quickly, you get cohesion funds to be able to get closer to the EU level of development quickly. So that's the logic behind cohesion funds, and it'll be very important to design them properly to make the system work. We will have also other kind of areas and with other problems, like the common agricultural policy. You have a very strong agriculture, and this will also be this will have to be redesigned, so to say, so to make it possible for you to join. For the countries like Poland, it will be a challenge, but it was the same for the countries like Germany or France when Poland was joining. So we have the experience, and it's possible to do that, and it's also in our general interest to have you in. This is an example of a concrete European policy, one of the most fundamental ones, because the agriculture is always a huge part of the European budget, that will have to be redesigned before Ukraine joins the EU. And the last point here, I will come back to the question of security. The Russian danger, even if you hopefully win, will be there, and the EU will have to be part of the defense system of Ukraine, and will need to have a strong military aspect. And now, actually, if Ukraine joins, it's strengthening this aspect, and I think that the EU should make use of that and make Ukraine part of the security European security system. We have to be ready also for the situation when the next American governments are not that keen on being part of the European system, on defending European countries, or at least helping European countries to defend themselves. So this is really I think the last moment when the EU can be active in this respect and build a kind of as a Pole, of course, I'm very much in favor of transatlantic cooperation. So we use the language of being kind of building building the European pillar of the transatlantic alliance. The pillar is very weak still, even if it's stronger today than it was 2 years ago, but it's still very weak. And I guess that's also something that should change and will have to change before Ukraine joins the EU. And maybe the last sentence, if I may, for my generation in Poland, joining the EU was one of the most experiences because it let us, change our lives because of that. Use this opportunity, go to other countries, get better education. In your case, it's even more the case because your lives are so strongly connected with both fight for democracy, your nation, but also the European future of your nation. So I would ask you and urge you to also to try to be part of this European discussion. Ukrainians should be part of this European discussion and to shape the way the EU is thinking and debating its future. You shouldn't just be kind of a best pupils in the room, best students. You should be active participants of this discussion. I think, for example, it wasn't the case when we were joining. We were like rather following what Brussels said, but I think it was not the best approach. You should sit at the table and participate in the discussion because we need your voice, and it's really important for you to be involved in that process. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I have a couple questions, but since he ended his talk on Ukraine having a voice at the table, maybe I should open up to the students who are Ukrainian here for questions before I start talking. So we'll grab a microphone for the audience.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Victor. Last year I finished here in KSC Public Policy and Governance. And back in the days I used to live in Brussels and I work in the EPP think tank, Martin Center. So I'm a bit familiar with Brussels bubble stuff. And my question is about the Ukrainian state capacity, because this big enlargement was back in 2004 when the EU grew a lot, and it demands a lot of capacity as well as in Brussels, as well in this newcomer or upcoming member states. And we know that Brussels bureaucracy, it's a thing to learn about. On everyday life here in Ukraine, I work on capacity building for Ukrainian government. So I train in public servants, officers, ministries, teams, etc. And I have to admit the state capacity is very low. It's very low for what we want here in Ukraine, not about talking what is needed to be accepted in the EU. Is there, I don't know, any talks or potential opening, multiple campuses of colleges of Europe all across Ukraine, because we're talking about multi-million state joining and the bureaucracy should, be integrated as well. So are there any ideas of how to integrate this much people with this much infrastructure to the European bureaucracy? Thanks.
I mean, I'm not the expert here, but I just want to say this is what KSE is here for. I mean, you're a graduate here building capacity in Ukraine. I mean, I'm new, so I can't really speak to that, but that's part of the goal, part of the idea of this institution right here. But
can we invest into cloning so we can do it faster?
We're working hard.
Yeah, I think it's a crucial question indeed, and I think that the EU is better, almost always, when it comes to the economic capacity. So it thinks a lot about the Ukrainian economic capacity. So the question whether it can be integrated into the single market. I think that's something that is discussed more than just than kind of the state capacity as such, in a sense of, for example, the capacity of bureaucracy. There are numerous projects on it, numerous training projects, The EU is financing many of them, but probably it's not enough. Probably it's not enough. It wasn't very much present also in 2004 in Poland. We still missed kind of a strong European university. We have Natolin, but Natolin is not playing any role in Poland, actually. So actually we are also quite bad when it comes to that. I would say that the overall education system, higher education system in Ukraine is better than it was in Poland in 2004. Maybe it's even better now than it is now in Poland. But yeah, maybe it's a complex question. But the Ukrainians are more educated than most of the Europeans. Maybe the quality is not always as high, but the education is quite, the level of education is quite high here. I wouldn't dismiss it so easily. You have also like important universities, not only in Kiev, in Kharkiv, in other places. I think that also there would be, I would see a need to mobilize these resources somehow, to link them also, and to see what's really missing. Because yeah, I think that in general you're right that the EU is not thinking enough about it, about state capacity to integrate into the EU.
Right. So my question would be the following. I know that there are some states in Europe that either openly support Russia, like Serbia and Hungary, or have had in the past some serious scandals about civil liberties, like once again Hungary and Poland, with those so-called LGBT-free zones. And I remember that there was kind of a threat, but it was somewhat empty because, well, in Poland, I guess it did work. In Hungary, not so much. That Europe threatened to take measures if such practices persist in the EU. So the question would be, are there any real procedures for that? What is the process of taking those measures? When can they be taken, and what can Ukraine expect to be wary of when we get accepted, and if we don't follow some rules?
This is a very difficult question because of the competences of the EU that are most likely limited. As you know, a lot has changed from if we look at the beginning of this crisis, let's say in 2009-10 in Hungary, and now a lot has changed. But kind of the most classic, the part of the treaties that was designed in order to prevent the situations that you mentioned, Article 7, is not working because you need unanimity without the country in question, and you cannot have it with Hungary and Poland, for example. So that's a huge problem. There is a big change because a regulation was accepted on conditionality of European funds, but the conditionality of European funds, there is a big kind of legal dispute whether it can be used in the cases of breaching this kind of fundamental laws, like in the case of the LGBT-free zones, because I think that still the majority of judges would say that it's mostly about the kind of the corruption related to the funds themselves, or some kind of, if the funds are not used properly, then it can be stopped. The kind of the transfers can be stopped. Not really when kind of the other aspects of the rule of law are being violated. So this is why the pressure is mostly political, and the EU is kind of not transferring, for example, the recovery fund money to Poland because of that. And I think that unless we change treaties, it will have to be like that. So it will have to be kind of, there will be no very clear instrument to kind of to really force the countries that are violating some fundamental rights to change their policies. It's of course different when it comes to the candidate countries, because you mentioned Serbia, and of course I don't think that Serbia can join the EU without changing its attitude towards Russia. So that's clear, and it will be simple. They will not join. They have also other problems, but this is one of them. So the alignment of these countries with the EU policy when it comes to candidate countries is necessary, and here the leverage of the EU is remarkable. But it's very different when it comes to the countries that are already member states. That's why I'm sure that also before the accession there will be a big debate about the change of treaties in order to give more leverage to the member states. But without that, I think it will be always complex and kind of political. It will require a lot of political will to kind of to force the countries, or try to force the countries to change their kind of attitude towards fundamental rights, for example.
Because the reason why I'm asking is because, I guess you can trace like the thing that if somebody gets accepted on one standards, like let's say more freedom for LGBTQ, and then we're gonna have like Hungary, like pressing that issue, then might there be like a question that some countries say that, well, they've already been in the EUs and they don't follow those rules. Should we follow them?
In candidate countries, yes?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, yes, in the political sense they can say so, but the criteria can change. So here I would say it's a political problem, but I'm sure that today a country that's not respecting the LGBT rights won't join the EU. It's just like in the case of like if it's like aligning with Russia or not aligning with Ukraine. So they can say, of course, as a part of the discourse, they can say so. Like Serbia can say, but look, Hungary is doing the same, and yes, we see it in Brussels, but the kind of the measures that we can take are really, the list of measures is really limited at the moment, unfortunately. I would hope it was more, but it's not, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Sorry, there were two other people in the queue.
Yeah, thank you for the lecture, first of all. And I want to hear your opinion on my question. And what do you think, what kind of an obstacle the post-war destructions might be for Ukraine to join the EU?
What kind of?
What kind of an obstacle might the post-war destruction in Ukraine be?
So what kind of situation?
What kind
after the war, or
after the victory, there will be destructions in Ukraine, and what kind of an obstacle will it stand in the way of Ukraine join the EU or not? What do you think?
I mean, in case of the Ukrainian victory, I don't think the destruction will be because everybody is now taking into account the destruction, and there is a lot of being done here by Ukraine, also by the other countries, and I think that the recovery and reconstruction will be linked with the accession. Even if you look at the Ukraine service at the European Commission in Brussels, they work together with G7. There is even a secretariat of G7 in their building, so to say. So just in order to align reconstruction with the accession. So I don't think that it will be seen as a. I mean, it is an obstacle because it requires a lot of money, but everybody expects that. So I wouldn't say that it will block the membership. What can block? And I think that's the biggest challenge. Is that the question is if the EU can accept Ukraine when the war is not finished, because that's what we fear mostly. So that as we discussed before the meeting, that it goes on and goes on. So that will be the biggest change. What to do then? What to do in the question when there is a stalemate, for example. That's I think the biggest challenge. After the war ends, no, I don't think it's going to be a huge problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. My name is Andrei. I'm a current student of Public Policy and Governance program, and we talk a lot about this double dimension of European Union, the enlargement versus deepening, and we talk a lot about capacity of the EU candidates. They need to improve their state capacity, but however, my question would be more about: is EU really capable to make this new wave of enlargement, imagining that we have some countries from southeast of Europe, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, for example. So 5, 6, 7 maybe countries. So is it really possible? Is really possible to do it? Or we need to amend the Lisbon Treaty of Lisbon, and only then we can talk about the enlargement. So it's depends where Ukraine stands in this position, because I believe, I don't know what's more, what harder to get votes to include Ukraine as a full-stack member of European Union, or to amend the Treaty of Lisbon.
It's a good question. First, when it comes to the next wave of enlargement, it's true that now everybody is linking Ukraine, Moldova, possibly Georgia with the Western Balkans. But I think it will have to stop, because the situation of Bosnia, Serbia is much more complicated actually than the situation in Ukraine. So I don't think all these countries will join at the same time, unless there are huge changes in Serbia, for example, which are not impossible, but I think are not probable. So I think that would be the first kind of decision to make. I don't see, for example, a country like Bosnia in the EU, also because of the kind of the internal conflicts that are so huge that I don't think the EU will be able to accept their membership. When it comes to the treaty change, I think it will be necessary. Yes, and I think that there is a growing kind of a changing attitude towards this. It might be a small change, I'd say, so not such a fundamental one that perhaps is needed. But I think that there is an understanding that there must be a change here. That there are some countries that would block it, probably like Hungary. So it would be a huge change to somehow invite them on board, probably. But there were these kinds of problems in the past, also with Hungary. And normally, this is a country you can buy. So if there is a need, there will be a way to convince it to change the treaties in order to make enlargement happen. So I will be cautiously optimistic about these changes. And also, I think when it comes to deepening versus enlarging, I think that might be a false alternative, because it not always means that. I don't think we always need deepening. We need kind of changes. Sometimes I would even say that the EU should be open toward kind of giving a bit more rights to the member states. And this could be seen as loosening by some. But definitely a reform. A reform is needed, because it's true that already now the EU is facing so many crises and difficulties that with such a huge country like Ukraine, it will be even more difficult. So I'd say yes, that a reform of the EU is needed, just like the reform of Ukraine, actually.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. And in this whole discussion that we talked about right now, I think there's a thing that you mentioned. There is this kind of willingness within the EU to give more freedom to states to decide upon what they actually want to do in politics, for example. I think it was one of the reasons for Britain to leave, United Kingdom to leave, as you mentioned it, because they wanted some more political freedom and actually to choose the kind of destination they want to get with their politics. So my question is, first of all, what is this paramount power that unites EU right now? By this, I mean that coming from this very old model of it, so to say, from the coal and steel kind of union and towards the customs union, we had different variations of it. First, it was just an economic one. Later, it became more of a geopolitical project. And afterwards, I think now we talk about common values, shared values. So what is EU exactly? It was the question that was bothering me throughout this whole presentation, and the interconnected question to this one, and how can Ukraine be a part of it, and should it be a part of it? Because like you already mentioned, there are some projects of giving parts of the membership to states without actually accepting them into the EU. And I think in some cases our society might treat it as some kind of a betrayal from the side of the EU, but if we're looking at the broader perspective, if we try to look into the future and say, oh, this might be a better example for us, so to say, because like UK, we might want to quit after some time. For example, I'm just like trying to like map the things out. I'm not saying that this is the case, but especially in the case of Ukraine, we might want some more political freedom and how to do this. So first of all, what is this power that unites EU? And the second one, why should Ukraine be there and should it be there? Thank you.
These are quite fundamental questions, and it's it's not easy to answer them. I think there were different things that were uniting the EU throughout the time, and they are still partially present, but it's just changing over the time. The first reason why the member states or the European states wanted to create European communities was a question of peace. They wanted to stop wars. They wanted to stop fight each other, and it worked. The two EU countries never started a war. So this is a very important reason. It brought a lot of stability on the continent, not as much as it is said because of the Balkan Wars, for example. And now we can also see that the EU was not able to stop the war in Ukraine, but still the continent is much more peaceful because of the European project. So I'd say that peace and this kind of the need for peace is still an underlying value of the EU, and the reason why Ukraine should join and should be part of the EU. And then there is a question of the way of life. I think that there is something that we share and that we want to share. The way of life that is based on somehow on freedom and prosperity, if we can say so. This may be empty words, and I'm not a big fan of using this European values as a concept because it's really empty. But on the other hand, if you look at Russia, you know what European values means because you know that there are no European values there. So there is something real, I think, when we think of freedom and prosperity. Yes, because the EU, and I think that's another thing that connects the EU, is the economic gains. That we have to be quite sincere about it. That most of the countries gained a lot on their membership in the EU in the long term. Poland is an example of that. Germany is an example of that. Some of countries lose, most likely because they had difficulties during the crisis, like Greece or Italy. One can argue that because they could, for example, they didn't have their currency, they couldn't manage the crisis very well, and then they were forced to adopt austerity measures. So it's not always the case that countries gain, but I would say that in general, overall, yes, and that Ukraine will gain as well from that. And also, it should be a member, not just an associate country, because membership gives you a place at the table. So you are part of the decision-making process and not just a decision taker, so to say. There are countries who agree to be the decision taker, and it's, for example, Norway. It's not part of the EU, but it has to follow most of it because it's in their interest to be aligned with the EU, both politically and economically. So basically, it has to follow the rules adopted by the others. That's why I think that Ukraine should have the place at the table, not next to the table. Of course, as I said, there is this question of the role of member states and nation states within the European project, and I think it's challenging. I would say that there should be more flexibility and openness towards European nations. That the European project shouldn't be defined as an alternative to national identities. That it should be that it should somehow encompass these national identities, and I think this is challenging for Brussels to think about this project this way. But I don't think it's impossible, and I think that, as I said, Ukraine helps us to conceptualize that because you have strong Ukrainian and European identity. That's why I think that it's doable, and that you should be part of this project.
Okay, so I have a couple questions. We don't have a ton of time left. Do you have a very quick follow-up? Because I have two more people in the queue. Yeah.
So regarding peace, you said that peace is probably one of the constructs that unites the EU. And my follow-up question is that with so many new limitations being imposed on EU states, like I said, in limitations in politics, the benefits are significantly lower. It's like a huge titan, and every state is a part of this titan. And to move this whole titan towards peace, every country has to make the decision. So the thing is, probably not even the follow-up question, is just once again the issue of this problem of states being intertwined in this kind of, in this bind. They have much more limitations and have much less benefits now because sometimes peace is a huge question. I'm going to give it over to other speakers. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
So the lady in the back who had a hand up, did you, yes.
Okay.
I have the question about education of Ukraine. Because for me, the society is very, it's made by education. So should we reform our education system so to try and more for inculcate good moral values?
I didn't get the question.
Can you just repeat the question? He didn't quite get it.
Okay. Should we reform our education system to inculcate more for good moral values?
I see. So the question just, should we reform our education system such that
Yes.
it inculcates European values? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that you can teach European values. You are fighting for European values here. So I don't know much about your about your education system. I know only a bit about the higher education system here. So some universities. So I don't know what you are being taught at schools, but the results are not bad, I'd say. So I don't see a huge need to reform that. I mean, in terms of the values you are being taught, maybe these are values taught at school, maybe these are values taught at home, maybe somewhere else. But I'd say that I think that the values that we are showing right now, I would hope that they will be present also for next generations in Ukraine. So if we can do it through schools, it would be great. And I think it would be good, of course, to have this kind of civic education. This is an important part of education for sure. I see the lack of it, for example, in Poland. I would want more of it. But as I said, I think that you could teach us European values here. So I wouldn't see a huge need to reform that part.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm afraid you have a very quick one. Okay, yeah, all right. You'll have the first and the last word.
Yeah. Next year, the European election are coming. So what your opinion, would it rather foster like the changes in the European Union structure and aspirations, or it would rather backfire and make it more conservative and not perceptive to new changes?
I'm afraid it will be a kind of a stalemate a bit, because the right will get more kind of seats, for example, in the European Parliament, I think, but still the kind of the so-called pro-European majority will dominate, which I don't think it's a bad thing, but I guess that the kind of the biggest challenge is that how to reform the EU without falling into the trap of choosing the anti-European forces, and without falling into the trap of choosing the status quo. So I would say that's the biggest problem. So to me, the biggest problem is whether the strongest forces, means the pro-European parties, whether they understand the need to reform the EU. I'd say that's the biggest problem for me. I think they will win still. Maybe, I don't know, the Greens might be needed for the majority, but as this is largely a pro-European party, I don't see a kind of a huge problem here. So the next commission will most likely also be kind of the president of the commission will most likely be kind of a pro-European figure, maybe von der Leyen, maybe someone else, but it will be a pro-European figure. But the biggest challenge to me is if they see the need to reform the EU and not just kind of defend the status quo. That would be kind of my question to the next group of leaders.
Okay. There was a gentleman in the back who put his hand up after I said the last question, and he seemed so disappointed that he couldn't ask his question, so I'm going to let him ask his question. The mic is coming to you.
Google Translator on my words. Okay. Now I see join the Ukraine to the EU as a great opportunity to resolve the military conflict with Russia. But if Ukraine joins the EU, won't it lose its indefinite identity? We have such as example as Poland with preserved its indemnity, but the EU also draw solution after that. Can the introduction of euro leave the hryvnia in the past as a rudiment? The only way out for me is individual program for Ukraine, like recovery. What do you can say about hryvnia and indefinite of Ukraine? Sorry, it was about my English.
So just, do you understand? Okay. So the question, there seems to be two questions. One is about, there's a concern about both Ukraine losing its identity when becoming part of a broader institution like
if
the
Ukraine,
EU.
Can Ukraine lose its indefinite if it's joined to the EU?
Okay, so one, and then you had a second question about the common currency, like the hryvnia versus the euro.
Yes.
And you think that the second question is, would Ukraine be prepared to join the Eurozone? Is that... Okay, we'll stick with the first question. Let's just go with the question about identity and Ukraine being able to maintain its identity.
I mean, it's a philosophical question. I hope not. I hope not. And I think that, as I said, I hope that the EU will allow its member states to keep their national identities. That these national identities won't be seen as an obstacle for the integration process. I hope so, and I think that Ukraine also can play a positive role in the transformation of the EU in this respect, because it's true that the EU had problems with these national identities, as I said. But also, as I said, I think that Ukraine showed that it's possible to have both identities, the Ukrainian one and the European one. So I don't think that there is a danger that you would lose your identity because you fought for it so hard, and you cannot just lose it like that. Just like Poland didn't lose its identity, and many other countries. So no, I don't think there is this danger. And I think that it will be even less of a danger if you join, because you are, as I said, the good example in this case.
Okay, well, thanks for a lively discussion, and again, thanks for attending this talk, which was organized very last minute. And most importantly, let's thank our speaker.
Thank you very much. It was really an honor for me to be able to speak in Kiev. So really, I'm very happy that I was able to discuss the EU with you.
Okay,
thanks
very much. Thank you.
And also, if you are interested in the EU and would want to somehow to know more about
clear fashion. So he's working on a project in some ways to help with, we talked about these, what are called cohesion funds or transfer funds, and they're designed to help develop Ukrainian institutions such that they are consistent with existing EU institutions. And we're interested in working on a project together with Brussels and some of the institutions he's involved. So KSE is in talks to partner with some EU institutions and EU universities in order to ensure that the Ukrainian education system is sort of, well, cohesive with the European system. So this is what he's here to talk about, and we're going to be talking about this in a few minutes. So if people are interested in this, you can either write to him or write to me. So, okay, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Right.